Yeah, good afternoon, students. My voice is audible. Can you please confirm? And can you see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay, fine. Thank you. Students, in today's class, we are going to discuss how to design a simple calculator as an Android application. All right. So we are going to see how to design the corresponding Android application. It's an Android application. How to design this Android application. Step one, in order to design this Android application, what we need to do? And step one, we need to create an XML file. We need to create an XML file. As you know that once you try to open a new application, automatically you'll be getting an application called activity underscore main. Okay, you'll be getting a file called activity underscore main.xml. Getting a file called like this, activity underscore main.xml. So in this file, what you need to do, you need to write the XML code. And probably in the previous class, we have discussed that no need to write this XML code. What we need to do, just we need to do drag and drop. Okay, just we need to do drag and drop. So once you do drag and drop for the corresponding buttons, automatically the XML code will be generated in this activity underscore main.xml, right? So here you see that I'm having a button. So here I'm having several buttons. All these buttons, what you need to do, you need to do drag and drop inside this. You need to do drag and drop. So once you do drag and drop, automatically an XML code will be generated. And not only that, and you can see that above this, you need to drag and drop and edit text box. Okay, you need to drag and drop and edit text box. Drag and drop and edit and edit. Drag and drop and edit text box. Okay. Edit text box. And that's what we have posted in the group for all the students, stating that you need to design this. You need to design this simple calculator. I hope all the students have designed this simple calculator. I would design students the simple calculator. I would like to know. I would design this simple calculator by dragging and dropping. By dragging and dropping, what we can do. By dragging and dropping, what we can do, we can design a simple calculator. And this is nothing but these are buttons. This is button. Okay. In your palette, you can find a button. So this button, just you can do drag and drop, right? And similarly, in your palette, you can find this edit text, and this edit text, what you can do drag and drop. And I believe this result is a label. The result and simple calculator is a label. Okay? This result and simple calculator is a label which you can find in your palette. Have you designed this user interface? Because in the first two classes, we are focused on this user interface. We call this as user interface, UID, user interface design. Okay, in the first two classes, we are focused on how to do this user interface design. Have you done this, students? Any response from your end? Any one student have done this?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Very good. That's a good response. Yeah. See, in today's class, I'll be focusing on this. In today's class, I'll be focusing on Java code. Okay, I'll be focusing on .java. I'll be focusing on a file called .java file. Okay? I'll be focusing on a file called .java file. And what's this name of the Java file? That is main activity. Okay, and let me write here. It is nothing but is main activity. Okay, main activity, main activity, main activity dot Java. Dot. So I'll be focusing on this file. Okay, I'll be focusing on this file. Okay, so you try to concentrate. It's quite simple. It's nothing tough. Okay, I'll be focusing on this file, that is main activity.java. So I won't be discussing this UID. I won't be discussing this UID because last class Tanushree madam has discussed in detail how to create this user interface, right? So in today's class we are going to discuss how to make this application interactive. Let me clear all my drawings. Okay, now let me change my marker. See, using XML code, what you've done using XML code. Okay, using XML code, what you've done, you've designed an application. You've designed using XML code, you've designed an application. You design an application. Application. So let us assume successfully you design this application, this simple calculator. Now, is this calculator, is it interactive? What you mean interactive? If I click on this button called 7, the 7 should be displayed on the text box. Okay, and if I click this multiplication symbol on my text box, it should print the multiplication symbol. Okay, similarly, if I try to click this 8 button here, I need to get 8. Okay, in other words, the simple application I need to make interactive. Now if I click this equal to button, it should compute 7 8s are 56 and the result should come as 56 on the text box. In other words, I need to make this application as interactive. How I can make this application as interactive? In order to make this application as interactive, I need to write .java code. What I need to do? I need to write a Java code. And where I need to write this Java code? I need to write this Java code in a file called main activity. I need to write this Java code in a file called main activity. I need to write a Java code in a file called main activity. So once I write Java code in this main activity.java, I can make this static application. I can make this static application as dynamic. I can make this static application as dynamic. What do you mean by dynamic? So once I click, 1 second students. Yeah, so what is dynamic? So once I click, that's what I've discussed. So once I click here, corresponding, the button value gets displayed. Means I'm going to make this application as interactive. So in order to make your application as interactive, we need to write a code inside this main activity.java, right? I hope you understood the difference between these two files. The first file is main activity.java and one more file is activity_main.xml, right? I hope students, you have opened your Android Studio. Are you open, student? Your Android Studio is running? Is it running? Yes, I need response from your end. Your
Yes, sir.
Android, yeah, is it running? So once you try to open a new application, you can find two files. And 1 second, students, let me share. Let me erase this. And one more thing, students, and don't get discouraged yourself. Actually, in my laptop, Android Studio is not running, but nothing to worry because I don't have 8 GB of RAM in my laptop. But anyhow, I'll try to convey the concept, right? How actually we can make this application quite interactive, right? Let me share my screen now. Share my screen. Yeah, fine, student. Yeah. So once you open your Android, suppose you want to develop a new application, you need to create a new activity, right? in order to develop a new Android application, what we need to do, students, we need to create a new activity. Once you create a new activity, automatically two files will be created. The first file is nothing but it is activity underscore main.xml. Two files will be created. Okay, one is activity underscore main.xml, and the second file is nothing but it is main activity.java. Automatically, these two files will be created. Right now, so let us assume that. Um, 1 second, student. Let me do some adjustment. Put everything in a single screen. Yeah, yeah, fine. Yeah. Now, uh, yes, yes, fine, students. I hope uh, you can see that. Yeah, fine. So there are two files which is available. One is activity underscore main.xml, and one more is main activity.java. Right now, let us assume that your design. Let us assume your design this calculator. So once you design this calculator, okay, in your .xml file, automatically an XML code will be generated. Now, now it's very, very important here. So let us assume here I've considered this button. I've considered the code for this button, okay, because the entire code remains same for all the buttons, okay. So now with respect to my explanation, I've taken this button, okay. Now let us assume that I've dragged and dropped this button. So once I drag and drop this button, I'll get the corresponding XML code. I'll get the corresponding XML code. So in this XML code, you need to do two important changes. In this XML code, you need to do two important changes. The first change is you need to change the ID. You need to change the ID of this button. You need to change the ID of this button. Okay. By default, it's going to pick some ID. By default, it's going to pick some ID. You try to pick a meaningful ID name. You need to pick a meaningful ID name. So because since it refers to, this button refers to number one, so that's why I've taken the name of this ID as button underscore one. Okay. By default, I repeat, by default, the ID will be some arbitrary ID. It picks some arbitrary ID once you do drag and drop. So step one, what you should do, you need to change the ID. Okay. So what name you can give for this ID? It's your choice, but try to give a meaningful ID name. So here I pick the ID name as button underscore one. Why I've taken button underscore one? Because this button corresponds to number one. This button corresponds to number one. So that's why I picked button underscore one. You may pick the ID as one also. It's your choice. Whatever ID you want, you can pick it. You can pick it. The most thing is the ID should be string. Okay, you can pick any ID of your choice, but you try to pick a meaningful ID name. But don't pick ABC. You can pick an ID as ABC also, but don't pick ABC because ABC is not a meaningful ID name. When I say meaningful, what is ABC? We don't know. So when I write button underscore one, I can easily make it out that this ID corresponds to button one. So by seeing the ID name, I can easily make it out that this button corresponds to ID one. So that's why we should always pick meaningful ID names, right? That's first step you need to change. And the second change, what you should do, you'll be having an attribute called Android colon text. You'll be having an attribute called Android colon text. And here, the value you need to set to one. The value you need to set to one. By default, it will pick some arbitrary text. By default, it picks some arbitrary text. You need to pick the ID as, sorry, you need to pick the value as one. Once you pick the value as one, you see that inside the button, and let me change my color. Yeah, inside the button, you can see the label called one. Inside the button, you can see the label called one. How this label one is displaying? Because in the attribute Android colon text, I've used one. So based on the value which you set here, okay, that label will be displayed on your button. So for example, this is your button. This is your button. Okay, inside this button, I'll be having a label called one. So how I got this label called one? Because the value I've set here is one. So that's why I'll get this label, right? So these are the two important changes which you need to do once you do dragging and dropping of any button. Any button which you do dragging and dropping, any button, can be any button which you do dragging and drop, you need to do changes in two important attributes. The first attribute is Android colon ID, where you need to change the name of your ID. And the second thing is you need to perform change in Android colon text, where you need to set the corresponding value to your button. Is it right, students? I hope you understood. You have understood? You understood, students? And your response?
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's
sir.
very good. Very good. So you understood. That's very good. Now, so we are done with this. Now, what I said, so with respect to this XML document, I'll be creating the corresponding application. But this application is not interactive. What is interactive? If I click on this button, okay, so if I click on this button, the one should be displayed on my text box. So in order to make this interactive, what I should do, I need to write a Java code. So where I should write the Java code? I should write the Java code in a file called main activity.java. So how to write a Java code, right? So now let us focus on this file. That is main-activity.java. See, by default, you see that all this code will be generated. That is this line, this. I've written only default code, okay? And this won't be there. This won't be there. This I'll discuss. Okay, this won't be there. I think this won't be there, right? And next we'll be having at override, we'll be having an on create, and then we'll be having the super, and next we'll be having this set content. Okay, up to here we'll be having a default code, and let me erase it everything. Let me clear my drawings and let me write a blue box. Okay, this main thing which I write in blue box, it won't be present. Okay, the statements will not be present. And yeah, I think one more thing I missed here. Okay, fine. Okay, so by default, okay, everything will be present except what I placed in blue box. So whatever I placed in blue box, it won't be generated automatically. By default, remaining entire code will be generated automatically except the code which I placed inside the blue box, right? Probably you can see the same code. Can you see the same code, students, in your activity, except what I've circled in the blue box? Can you see that? Any response, students? Can you see that same code in main activity.java? Are you seeing something different in the file called this? Students, the response? Respond?
Yes, sir. We are seeing.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, you can see the same code, right? Why there's a delay in my talk or what? I am not getting. Okay, please try to respond as much fast as possible, right? Okay, fine. Okay, fine. Now it's very, very important here. I'm going to discuss some concept you need to understand here. Now, probably you might have studied event handling. You might have studied a concept called event handling in Java. You have studied, students, event handling. Probably in your fourth semester, you might have studied a concept called event handling. How to handle an events, right? How to handle an events in Java is very, very important. What is this event handling? It's nothing but a source. What is source? A source, what it does, it generates. A source generates. What it generates? A source generates an event. A source generates an event. Okay. A source generates an event. So whenever a source generates an event, and this event needs to be notified to a listener. I repeat, a source generates an event. Okay, when a source generates an event, and this event is to be notified to a listener. Okay, once a listener is notified about a particular event, and what this listener does, this listener is going to process the event. This listener is going to process the event. This flow you should understand. This flow you need to understand. I repeat, okay, repeat. A source is going to generate an event. A source generates an event. So one source generates an event. Okay, this event needs to be notified to a listener. So once a listener is notified about a particular event, once a listener is notified about a particular event, and what this listener does, this listener is going to process the corresponding event. That's the flow you need to understand. Now, with respect to our example, what is the source? With respect to our example, the button is the source. With respect to our example, the button is the source. What's a button? Here is a button. This button is the source. And this button generates an event. This button generates an event. This button generates an event. Now the question comes, when this button generates an event, when this button generates an event. So whenever a user clicks on this button, and this button generates an event, and which event it generates? It generates an event called on click. It generates an event called on click. I repeat, okay. Here source is nothing but it's your button. Source is nothing but it's your button. Here the button generates an event. The button generates an event. When the button generates an event, whenever a user clicks on this button generates an event. So what event it's going to generate? It's going to generate an event called on click. So once the on click event has been generated, okay, this on click event will be notified. This on-click event will be notified to the listener. So once this on-click event has been notified to the listener, and what this listener has to do? This listener has to process the event. Okay, that is first observation you need to do. Now here the button is generating an event called on-click. So once event has been generated on-click, I'm trying to notify to the listener. See, an event in order to be notified to a listener, an event in order to notify to this listener has to be registered with the source. That's very, very important. You need to understand. I repeat, okay. The source is generating an event. So once source generates an event, this event will be notified to the listener. Okay. A event in not to be notified to a listener, what this listener has to do? This listener has to register with the source. So once the listener has registered with the source, and when the source generates an event, and this event will be notified to the listener. I hope we understood, students. In case you're not understood, you let me know. I'll try to redo it. Understood, student? It's quite simple. Probably in your college, you'll be launching some activity or some games, some programs. Okay, you'll be launching some programs. Okay, programs. What program can I tell? Probably some fest is there. Okay, we have what fest we are having? I forgot the fest of. What is the fest of our college student?
Interact.
Yeah, very good. Interact. During interact time, we'll be having several events. For example, there's an event called cricket. There's an event called cricket. Event called cricket. Okay. When the event cricket is there, what we are going to do? All the students, let us assume he is student one. Student one has registered with cricket. Means the student has registered his team with this. Sorry, student one has registered for this cricket. Okay. Student 2 has registered for this cricket. But student 3 has not registered. Okay. Now the cricket is going to start. In other words, the event is going to start. Now, since the event is going to start, what I'm going to say? Since the event is going to start, and I'm going to intimate about this event only to this student 1 and student 2, but not student 3. Why? Because student 1 and student 2 have registered for this event called cricket. Is it right, student? And the same concept here also applies. Okay. Here, what is doing? A source is generating an event. So once an event has been generated, this event needs to be notified to the listeners. This event has to be notified to the listener who has registered with the source. I hope you understood, students. You got it?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, very good. And that's what actually I would like to convey, right? Okay, fine. Now, 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 and let me clear my some drawings. Let me do all this clear some drawing so that make it a little bit clear. Remove all my drawings. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah, fine. Fine, student. Now, once again, let me pick my pen. Fine. Okay, fine, student. Now I said that who is going to generate an event? Button. The button is going to generate an event. When a button generates an event, I need to notify to the listener. Okay, not to notify to the listener, what I have to do? A listener has to register with the source, right? Now, 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 inside my Java code, I need to refer to this button. I need to refer to this button. Inside my Java code, I need to refer to this button. What this button? This button corresponds to one. This is an XML code. Okay, this button is nothing but using XML code. I've written this button. Using XML code, I've written this button, right? Now the same button, what I need to do, I need to refer inside my Java code. Inside my Java code, I need to refer. How I can refer? See, not to refer inside my Java code, what I need to do, I need to use an inbuilt method called find view by ID. I need to use an inbuilt method called find view by ID. You see that here, student, find is one word, view is second word, and by is third word, ID is the fourth word. The find view by ID is a method name. It is a method. And let me write it here. Find view ID is a method. I think you should know the convention of writing the method names. Okay, with respect to method names, the first letter of the first word always must be in the lowercase. The second letter of the first word will be uppercase, and similarly, the third letter of the first word will be uppercase, and the fourth letter of the first word will be uppercase. Like this, it goes on. Only the first letter of the first word will be lowercase. Remaining all letters will be in the uppercase. That's a very, very important thing you need to observe. You need to observe. The right student, you need to observe. You see that? Can I do it? You see that? That's very, very important. But anyhow, if you're using some editor, automatically you'll get this. But you need to understand. Find is one word, view is second word, by is third word, ID is the fourth word. You see that B is in uppercase, by is in uppercase, I is in uppercase. Why? Because the first letter of the second word, third word, fourth word, fifth, sixth, seven, like this, it goes on. It will be always in uppercase. It should always in the uppercase, right? But only the first letter of the first word will be in the lowercase. Will be in the lowercase. That's one important observation you should do. Now, let's do. Find view by ID, and that you need to understand here. You see the students, every element, this is one element, this is element, every element, this is one more element, edit text. Every element we call it as a view. Every element we call it as a view. This is a view. Every button, any user, any user, uh, uh, any user interface which you place inside your activity, we call that as a view. So this button is a view. Okay, this text box is a view. So that's why I'm telling, I want to find a view. I want to find a view. How I want to find a view? I want to find a view with respect to ID. And that's what it says. I want to find a view. How I want to find? I want to find a view with respect to ID. And what is the ID? And this is the ID which is specified here. That is r.id.button. Okay. R stands for resource. R stands for resource. R stands for resource. R stands for resource. When you see a tree structure on the left side, when you see that, okay, but if you're using some Android Studio, on the left side, you can find a folder called resource. You can find a folder called resource. In this resource, you can find all the IDs of your XML document. In XML document, I'll be having several IDs. All these IDs, okay, all the IDs will be present in this resource. And that's why using r.id. Means in this resource called R, I want to find an ID which is having a button called, which is having an ID called button_1. In other words, let me erase this. Okay. In other words, you see that? One second, student. Is everything. Find view by ID or button. Is everything. This entire statement is referring to this button. This entire statement is referring to the button which is present inside my XML document. That's very, very important. You should know how to refer a button in your XML document inside your Java code. So inside your Java code, whenever you want to identify, inside your Java code, whenever you want to identify any view, you should always identify with respect to ID. That's why I said this ID is very, very important. This ID is very, very important. You see that the ID I've written is button underscore one. In the same ID I've put here. You see that button underscore. So this ID is very, very important. So what ID you write here? What ID you write here? The same ID you need to mention here. Okay, so with respect to ID, what we can do? We can refer to a corresponding view. Okay, in general, we call every user interface as view. Okay, also view. That is the first step. I hope you understood this, right? And let me clear my drawings. That's very, very important. Okay, now when I write find view by ID or dot ID dot button underscore one, it's going to return a view. It's going to return a view object. It's going to return a view. Okay, it's going to return a view object. It's going to return a view object corresponding to this button. It's going to return a view object corresponding to this button. But I want to typecast this view to button. I want to typecast this view to button because one is nothing but it's a button. So in order to typecast view to button, we are going to use this. That's what we use typecasting here, button. By default, find view by ID is going to return a view. It's going to return a view. And this view, what I'm trying to typecast into button. I'm trying to typecast into button. And this entire button, I'm trying to store in a variable called btn1. Actually, it can be any variable name of your choice. It can be any variable name of your choice. Okay. So now what's the type of this? What's the type of this button one? Button one is something like this button. So therefore, you can go above and you can declare a variable that is button btn. That's what it is. Nothing else is there. Okay. So this variable is of type. That is button one. This variable is of type button. It's of type button. Why? Because you see that I'm typecasting entire thing into button. This entire button object we can call as an object. We call this button as an object. Okay. This button object I'm trying to store in a variable called button one. So that's why the type of button one is button btn1 is button. Okay. Fine, students. So this is very, very important thing you need to understand. This is true for all the buttons, Okay, for all the buttons, how you are going to refer all the buttons in order to refer in your Java code. This is the statement which you need to write. This is the statement which you need to write for all the buttons. One thing which changes. What changes? Only one thing it changes. One thing which changes is ID. Only the ID changes. Only the ID changes. The entire code remains the same. The entire code remains the same. Why? See, for button one, the ID will be button underscore one. For button two, ID will be a different ID. Probably it may be button underscore two. Okay. So this entire code you have to repeat inside your Java code, right? But anyhow, that we'll discuss later. So I've done with this, students. I've done with this. And one more thing, students, in case the session gets terminated, you can use the same link to rejoin again. Okay. You can use the same link to rejoin again. Okay, fine. Yeah, fine. Now, so successfully, what I'm trying to do, students, so successfully, I'm trying to refer to a button. I'm sorry, I'm clicking it. Successfully, I'm trying to refer to a button. What is that? Who is referring? This button one. Let me change the color. This button one. So this button one. This button one refers to this button. And this button one refers to this button, which is present inside my XML code. Okay. This button one refers to this XML code inside my Java code. Now, what I said, students, is button. What is button? Button is a source. As you know that what the source does, a source generates an event. When a source generates an event, it has to be notified to the listener. Okay, a listener, in order to be notified, a listener has to register with the source. Now the question is how a listener can be registered with the source. Okay. A listener, in order to register the source, we need to use a method called set on click listener. Okay, we need to use a method called set on click listener. You see the word called on click, on click, on click. Because I want to listen for an event called on click. That's why I use the word called set on click listener, because I want to listen. I want to listen for an event called on click. So this on click listener I'm registering with button 1. Who is button 1? Button 1 is nothing but it is your button. This is your button. Your button is nothing but your source, and that's what I said. So button 1 is the source. With respect to this source, what you're trying to do, you're trying to register a listener, and this listener is going to listen for on click event. I've done, students. Have you understood, or any questions you can ask? And let me clear all this stuff so that we can visualize the code properly. Visualize the code properly. All this. Yeah. Yeah. Any questions, students? So this statement, what I'm trying to, this statement is trying to register. This statement is trying to register a listener with this button. Okay, I'm trying to register a listener to this button. What is this button? This button is nothing but my 1. With respect to button 1, I'm trying to register a listener. I've understood. Any questions, students, you can ask. I'm ready to take your questions. Any questions you can ask. Any questions? And one more thing, you see that set on click listener is a method. Set on click listener is a method. You see that set is one word, on click is second word. So on is second word, click is third word, a listener is fourth word. And that's why you see that O is in uppercase, C is in uppercase, L is in uppercase. It is a standard convention with a Java follows. Okay, but you see that S is in lowercase. The first letter of the first word will be lowercase, but the remaining words, the first letter always will be in the uppercase, right? Yeah. Any questions, students? I'm ready to take your questions. So any questions, you can answer. Any questions, I'm ready to answer. Any questions and no questions? Any questions? Why you're not responding? Have you understood?
Yes, sir.
Very good. That sounds good. That sounds great. Yeah. You understood, right? So up to which point we are finished? So we are finished with respect to source. Source we are finished, and we are finished. Listener also we are finished. Okay. So now what the listener has to do? So once, let us assume I've clicked. Let us assume I've clicked on this button. I've clicked on this button. So once I click on this button, what's going to do? I'm going to intimate to this listener. I'm going to intimate to the listener that an on-click event has been generated. I'm going to intimate the source. The source is going to intimate the listener that on-click event has been generated. Now, what this source has to do? What this listener has to do? That's what a listener has to process the event. Okay, a listener, in order to process the event, okay, it needs to implement some methods. A listener, in order to process the event, okay, a listener, in order to process the event, what it has to do? It has to implement some methods. And all these methods will be present in an interface. All these methods will be present in an interface. The methods interface. The methods which the listener has to implement. Okay. All these Java concepts, okay. The methods which the listener has to implement in order to process the event will be present in an interface. Now the question is, in which interface I need to implement? I need to implement an interface called on-click listener. Okay, I need to implement an interface called on-click listener interface. And in this interface, there is a method called on-click. In this interface, there's a method called on-click. Okay, and this on-click method is going to process the events. This on-click method is going to process the events, and that's why you see that in my code. That's why initially I put in the blue color. Can you see that? You see that? See that? You see that here? I've used a keyword called implements. The code implements we use for interface. Okay, what interface I'm trying to implement? I'm trying to implement interface called on-click listener, and this on-click listener interface will be present inside the class called view, and that's why you return view.onClick. What is that? View.onClick. View is nothing but view is the name of the class. View is nothing but is the name of the class. View is a name of the class. View is the name of the class, and inside this class, there will be a listener. And what's the name of the listener? The name of the listener is on-click listener. Why I'm trying to implement this on-click listener? I'm trying to implement this on-click listener in order to process the events. Okay, a listener, in order to process the event, I need to implement this interface, that is